Hey, it's not the 90s anymore. You're not skipping leg day, but what you are skipping is hamstring day. Damn! Skipping hamstrings is like doing arms, but not doing bicep curls. You can't build a balanced looking leg and an athletic functional leg without them. You want to have sexy looking legs, but you do not want to have busted up knees. And strong hamstrings might just be your key to bulletproofing your knees. My good friend Ben Patrick, the knees over toes guy, has had a huge influence in bringing back hamstring strength for knee health and freak athleticism. And I'm going to show you my favorite moves to get all of that, plus build aesthetic, well-rounded hamstrings. We're talking visible curves, tight hamstring insertions, and some balanced quad to hamstring strength. The Nordic hamstring curl has exploded in popularity lately, but let's face it, it's pretty freaking hard. I used to skip them myself, especially back in college when I couldn't do them very well, but they are so powerful for building strength behind the knee that I can't ignore them anymore. So here's how to do it at any level with all different types of equipment. Now a Nordic bench is optimal, but here are 2 tips to make these better instantly. First, we gotta get serious about your knee padding. And secondly, we gotta get serious about how we're clamping down on your ankles. Sufficient padding is gonna be key because you're gonna wanna dig your knees in and really leverage. If you don't have enough padding, you won't work as hard. Now, if you have a Nordic bench, what I want you to do is I want you to really mash down on the ankle support so that you're really clamped in before you start. The same idea here if you're using a lat pull down machine, which is a great option, but just make sure you really push down on those ankles. You can even rig this up with just a bench and a weight belt, clamp that thing down tight, and you're good to go. You can also do these on a GHD machine, but I find it's a little easier to cheat the movement by sliding the knees down the pad if you're not set up correctly. The biggest mistake I see beginners making in this movement is not keeping tension on their hamstrings through the full range of motion. So here are 3 ways to help get you to stay in tension throughout that full range. Okay, the first method is to attach a band over your head. You can try out different widths to find out exactly what the right amount of tension is for you. Just be sure not to use something so flimsy that you crash onto your face. The second is all about the hip angle. If you bend the hips a little bit more, it's going to make it a little easier on the way down, and then over time you can extend the hips to make it harder. And last, you can just fight the eccentric with your body weight, and then just make sure that when your hands connect to the ground, you keep fighting through that full range of motion, stay on tension before you push back up. My recommended reps here are 4 to 6 repetitions with a 4 to 6 second lowering or eccentric phase. Okay, Marcus, the Nordic isn't for me. Maybe you've got tight hamstrings, in which case I'll show you some good stretches pretty soon. Or maybe it's a pain to set up, or like me when I was in college, they're just freaking frustrating and you don't want to do them. Okay, but we still got to get some strength with knee flexion, so we're going to use the hamstring curl either on a machine or some home gym options. The seated or lying hamstring curl are both great options. The key here is that with the machine or the home gym setups, you're going to get great mind-muscle connection, which is key for growth and for strength, especially for beginners when you're just learning this. The beauty here is there's no crazy setup. You just slide in, you start getting a great pump. However, to make your training really worthwhile, the details are important on this. So here are 2 to pay attention to. The first is that similar to the Nordic hamstring curl, it's all about tension through that end range of motion. So make sure that you pause on each rep in the stretched position. Second, switch your toe position to get all the angles in. Turn them inward to bring up the inner hamstrings. Turn them out to set up for outer hamstrings. Plantar flex to make the hamstring curl harder and more isolated, and then dorsiflex when it gets too hard and you want to feel stronger. Now, if you're at home, you can set up a banded or a dumbbell leg curl. You can also use a rower, a slide board, a physio ball, or one of my new favorites, the Brett Contreras gliding hamstring curl. Now, low reps and heavy can work well for this exercise, but you got to have a machine that you feel really comfortable and they fit your proportions. So if you're a shorter athlete or you just don't fit the proportions of the machine, then I would recommend something in the 10 to 15 rep range, moderate reps. Something like a 2-1 exo tempo until you reach full range of motion failure, then do 2 to 3 reps past this point, doing partial repetitions, getting that full stretch still on each rep. And if you're going with one of the home gym options, you definitely want to bump up the reps because you can't get as much tension in the band or the dumbbell or any of those leg curl options that we showed on my back. Now here's a bonus. Doing these unilaterally is powerful, and maybe the best way that I like to do them is with the 2 up, 1 down approach. To do this, do a leg curl all the way to the top with both legs, then remove one leg and slowly lower down with just a single leg at a time. Alternate each leg for 10 reps. That makes 20 total. And you can do this for a single set after you've performed your 2 to 3 sets with both legs at the same time. Ow! If you got tight hamstrings, then try incorporating these 2 mobility moves a couple times a week or before your hamstring training session. The first is an elephant walk step. You're gonna alternate each leg, stiffening it and flexing the quad as hard as you can. Make sure that you're getting a straight leg position behind the knee on every rep. 20 reps alternating side to side with a 1 to 2 second pause on each is plenty. Next up is the lunge to hamstring mobilization. We're gonna go back and forth pulsing, and every time we get into this hamstring fold, we are going to hold for 5, even 10 seconds. You can pull the toe up to exaggerate that stretch. Make sure you're flexing the quad and really pushing behind the knee, keeping that knee straight. Also focus on keeping a neutral back position on this one, as opposed to the elephant walk step, where it was okay to round. This one we wanna stay in a neutral low back position. Hey, have you learned anything from this video yet? How about any of our videos from the past? If you have and you haven't subscribed to the channel, it would mean so much to me if you would go there right now, hit the subscribe button. The more we grow this channel, the better the videos, the more education we can bring you, and the more impact we can have. Let's get back to it. Marcus, when are we gonna lift heavy weights? Right, to build muscle, you need to lift something heavy at some point. Isn't that right? Well, yes and no. You wanna lift heavy, but you do not want to get away from the target muscle. So we're working on the barbell Romanian deadlift. That's gonna keep us focused on our hamstrings, as compared to a conventional deadlift where we might leverage our quads to push through failure in our hamstrings and actually put us at risk, maybe for more injury. Even using just moderately heavy weights, I have been getting my hamstring tie-ins ripped up lately with this exercise. While soreness isn't everything, there is no doubt about what this exercise works and how effective it is. And here's how to load it up safely and effectively. First, get yourself some lifting straps. If you don't have them, you may as well skip this exercise altogether. The reason is your grip is definitely going to fail before your hamstrings do when you do this correctly. Second, here's a move where you actually might want to cheat the lockout. A full lockout will shift some of the load to your glutes as opposed to your hamstrings, which isn't a bad thing, but if you're here for the hamstrings, then consider stopping the rep a couple inches short before descending back down. Now you definitely want to reach for your end range right before your back starts to round. This is where you're going to pause for a brief second before coming back up to a couple inches short of full lockout. I've seen so many people go from barely being able to touch their toes to a full forward fold just by emphasizing that full range of motion and that stretch position on the RDL. Now, what about arching the low back? I typically advise against this for heavy movements like the back squat, but in the RDL, it's actually a very good tip and can help engage those hamstrings and stretch them at their insertion point up on the glutes. So let that arch be your guide for your range of motion. The moment you start to lose it is when you need to stop and go back up. The last tip is to elevate your forefoot, just like this. This can help you get a better mind-muscle connection and push more of the load back on your hamstrings, which is especially nice for beginners who are learning this movement. So should your barbell ever touch the floor? The Romanian deadlift never touches the floor. This keeps the hamstrings under constant tension. But the stiff-legged deadlift touches the floor and typically pauses there, meaning you have to initiate from a dead stop, and this involves your low back a bit more. Now, if you don't have a barbell, you can load dumbbells in the front of your body or out to the side. Pick a position that feels most comfortable to you. The more they are placed in front of the body, the more demand you'll feel in your low back. This isn't a bad thing, but just be aware. And consider higher rep ranges since you may not be able to go as heavy with dumbbells. For recommended reps, I love the 8 to 12 rep range. I'll use slow, controlled eccentrics around 2 to 3 seconds. Pause briefly at the bottom to get a stretch and some isometric strength. Then I'll come back up to just a few inches from lockout before heading back down again. Now, one of the biggest considerations for building strength and muscle is staying consistent and avoiding injury. This next movement is great for hamstring strengthening, but also helps me and a lot of other people strengthen and protect their low back. If you have access to a bench like this, a 45-degree back extension, it's my favorite way for getting a lot of low weight, high rep hinging sets in. Now, under a heavy barbell in the Romanian deadlift, you gotta be really secure and rigid in your low back. You don't have a lot of wiggle room, but when we're over on the 45-degree back extension, we can be a little bit looser with our back position and we can stay safe. Plus, we can still get that great stretch at the bottom in our low back, which again, helps for strengthening and bulletproofing to avoid injuries in the future. Now, you can use a GHD for this exercise, but just keep in mind that at the bottom, you're not gonna be able to get as much hip flexion, so I still prefer the 45-degree bench if you have access to it. Now, a few details to get the most out of your hamstrings on this movement. You're gonna keep your legs as narrow as you can get them and even turn your toes in slightly. This is gonna keep some of the work off of your glutes and put it more tension onto your hamstrings. And if you tuck the pelvis a little bit and round that low back, then you're really gonna make sure that you're keeping the low back and the glutes out of the equation. That way you're focusing mostly on hamstrings throughout the whole set. Now, if you're gonna start loading this exercise, the two options that I prefer are the band and the weight plate. Hold them right in front of your chest, and that way you can maintain those technique points that I just gave you. Now, you might see people using a barbell on their back for this exercise. It's not my favorite. I think it puts too much tension on the low back and takes the focus and the mind-muscle connection off the hamstrings. For this, I recommend higher reps, closer to 30, and I don't pause at the bottom because it gives me a massive head rush. If there's one place to pause, it's at the top of the last rep, just like I'm doing right now. This isometric hold is a great way to work on strength and to finish out your last set. A suitable alternative if you don't have one of those 45-degree benches is to set this up in a rack with a barbell. Make sure you have something to anchor your feet, like some heavy dumbbells, and this works fairly well. Okay, so you've been building strong and meaty hamstrings, but you got the athleticism of a garbage truck. Now let's fix that. On a single leg with the RDL, you can rotate and you can maneuver your hips slightly to get a unique stretch in your hamstring from different angles. Supporting this movement with a hand doesn't remove the stability and coordination component entirely. It just lessens it slightly and can be a great way for beginners to tackle this movement. But even if you're advanced, supporting with the hand can also help you load up even heavier. Here are the 3 coaching tips. Make sure to reach this hip back as far as you can. Also, maintain that low back arch just like you did with the barbell RDL. And as far as loading goes, I want you to load with the hand opposite the working leg, and as you go down, reach slightly across your body before coming back up. Now for equipment, I love the dumbbell and holding onto a post just for ease of setup, but the landmine single leg RDL is a great suitable alternative. You're gonna set up pretty much the same way, except for you're not gonna need a hand support on the rig because the fixed nature of the landmine itself is gonna serve as that balance and helping you with the coordination aspect of this. The grip is going to be a factor because this barbell is much thicker than a dumbbell. That's why I've got my lifting strap on so that I can make sure I'm not failing my grip before my hamstrings get worked. For these, stick to the 10 to 15 rep range and lower slowly. Alternate legs for a new set every 75 to 90 seconds. Now this last section is all about bringing your athleticism up a notch. I'm gonna give you 2 different options depending on your comfort level with speed movements for athleticism. Sprinting is one of the true innate forms of athleticism, and it's a great way when dosed correctly to put your hamstrings under high-speed contractions. But make no mistake about it, if you haven't been sprinting a lot in the last few years, take it easy to start. We don't want you getting on this thing and blowing out a hammy. Or if sprinting's not your game, you can choose a kettlebell. The kettlebell swing is an entirely different type of loading and weight training than we've shown you thus far. It's powerful and it represents another way that we can load the hamstrings under speed contractions. Kettlebell swings require some technical proficiency to get the most out of them. So if you haven't done a lot of kettlebell swings, take some time to learn the foundations before you use this as a tool inside of your training. And if you're interested in developing those fundamentals for your kettlebells, check out my 5 kettlebell foundations to improve your overall kettlebell game right here. When sprinting, start slow and build up. Keep your arms at 90-degree angles and pump through your shoulders. Think about shortening your contact time with the ground. And lastly, drive your knees up and pull your heels right into your butt. When swinging, learn the basic swing first. Make sure you're hinging at the hips and not squatting. Your knees should never be tracking forward. Keep an arch back and bring your hands towards your crotch. To get even more out of the hamstrings during the swing, think about stiffening your legs a bit more than normal, and you can even raise your forefoot up onto some plates just like this. For sprinting, a curved runner is great. You can control your speed and slow down quite easily, plus you're close to the gym equipment for the rest of your training. My favorite rep and set scheme for swings and sprinting are as follows. For swings, try 8 to 10 swings every minute for 8 minutes. Perfect technique, challenging weight, and over weeks you can build to 10 sets, then 12 sets, and so forth. For sprinting, every 2 minutes, sprint for 10 to 15 seconds. In your first week, start off with 4 to 6 sets, and over time, build up to 15-second sprints for 8 to 10 sets total. If you want to learn how to put this all together into a complete workout for your hamstrings, I've got 2 options linked in the description below. The first is going to be if you have 2 lower body days in your training split, how to break up these movements on both of those days. Alternatively, if you want to break this up over 3 days, you could have some hamstring exercises on lower body day 1, And then you can have the other hamstring exercises on your full body pull day, which is going to include some back exercises as well as hamstring exercises in the form of things like the RDL. Remember, you can go and click on the top line of the description below to get that free PDF download that's going to outline how to put it all together into a workout. Now, if you want to find training that's covering strength, muscle building, and athleticism, you can find all of that inside my Persist training program.